thank you so much for tuning in to tonight's debate on the legalization of recreational marijuana here in Arizona. We're streaming live from the Arizona Republic newsroom. We're joined tonight by Chad Campbell, who represents the Yes on 207 campaign. We're also joined by Lisa James, who will speak on behalf of the No on 207 campaign. Previous efforts to legalize marijuana here in Arizona have been unsuccessful. This year's effort is on your ballot as Proposition 207. It would allow adults 21 and older to possess as much of an ounce of marijuana. The marijuana would be sold at the 130 or so existing medical marijuana facilities throughout the state. The ballot measure would allow people previously convicted of certain crimes to have their records erased. It would also place a 16% excise tax on recreational marijuana sales and offer 26 retail licenses to people who were historically disadvantaged by marijuana laws. The state would issue licenses based on criteria that state health officials would need to create. The representatives here to talk to us tonight about Proposition 207 will be allowed up to 1 minute to respond to questions. Each is allowed a 30-second or so rebuttal if needed, and I may interject and interrupt to ask some follow-up questions. So we flipped a coin, and Lisa won, so she will deliver the opening statement first. Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for having us here tonight, for hosting this, and thanks for those of you who have chosen to turn in to educate yourself on what's on your ballot this November. Prop 207 is 17 pages of sweeping changes to Arizona law that will be virtually impossible to change. I represent the Arizonans for Health and Public Safety, and we are a grassroots organization comprised, it's bipartisan. We have people from the medical profession, people from law enforcement, moms, dads, people from substance abuse programs, and we've come together because we feel strongly that Prop 207 is something that voters need to pay close attention to, read the details in it, because even for those of you who might support recreational marijuana, Prop 207 is simply not the way to do it. Thank you for having us tonight.
Chad?
Thank you, and I want to echo Lisa in thanking AZ Central and Yvonne for hosting this debate, and thank you, Lisa, for being here tonight. Looking forward to a lively discussion. We named our campaign the Smart and Safe Arizona Act for one very simple reason. This is the responsible way to legalize adult use marijuana in Arizona. By voting yes on Proposition 207, we will eliminate a dangerously unregulated black market and replace it with a safer, much more strictly regulated program that will create thousands of new jobs in communities across Arizona and generate hundreds of millions of dollars in new revenue for community colleges, public safety, roads, and public health programs. And we'll begin saving millions of dollars every single year in taxpayer money by stopping the needless arrest and incarceration of people who should never have been arrested in the first place. Our marijuana laws are archaic and outdated. It's time to change that, and that's why it's time to vote for Proposition 207. Thank you.
All right, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. So let's start off. 11 states have legalized recreational marijuana across the U.S. What do you think voters need to know about the outcomes in those states when they consider how to vote on this proposition here in Arizona?
Yeah. Well, by and large, we're seeing great success with programs across the country when it comes to legalizing adult use marijuana. We in Arizona here looked at those programs, I want to point this out, and took what we thought were the best attributes of some of those programs and some of the lessons that they probably want to learn from their mistakes and apply them to our language here in this proposition. We want to make the best possible proposition in the country. We think we've done that, and we really have, I think, evaluated the best scenarios, the best case practices, and really taken our neighboring states, Colorado, California, Nevada, all of our neighboring states have legalized marijuana in some way, shape, or form for recreational use by adults, and we've learned from what they've done and really created the best possible package to put forth in front of Arizona voters, and it's very different than the one that failed by a small margin, in 2016.
Lisa?
So I would say that we need look no further than our neighboring states to see the problems that have incurred with recreational marijuana legalization. And the revenues have not been as projected. they have more impaired drivers, more teens are using, more people are in danger. And frankly, what they have in those states that we are not going to have in Arizona is the ability to tweak those laws. In Arizona, we have what's called voter protection. So all 17 pages of this, we can't pick and choose, will be locked into it, whether they're intended or unintended consequences that we don't agree with, if we are locked into this policy.
You want to rebut to some of her
Well,
claims?
I would say one thing about the Voter Protection Act. That's something strongly supported by voters because the legislature has interfered with previous voter-approved initiatives in the past. So I think everybody supports that. And I want to point out, we actually put language in our ballot measure, which is very unheard of, to actually enable the legislature to further the intent when it comes to DUI enforcement, using new technology for law enforcement. So we actually address that concern proactively, which is unheard of in ballot measures in Arizona.
When you looked at some of these neighboring states, some of these other states that have done this, what specifically were you looking at as you were trying to cobble together this proposition?
Yeah, well, we're looking at a few things. First and foremost, how do you create a package that's going to actually mitigate and eventually eliminate, for the most part, the black market? That's really one primary goal here. And so we looked at trying to set a taxation structure that worked best, working with economists that are used by businesses here in Arizona, have been used by the governor's office, people that are trusted by everybody in the state to develop that type of price point. We think we hit that right on the head. Secondly, we wanted to create a package that actually decriminalized marijuana. We're the only state in the country that treats the first-time arrest and conviction of personal possession of marijuana as a felony offense. That is ridiculous and so outdated and so egregious that has to be changed. So we took that head on too, and we allow for expungement of people who've been previously convicted of what will now be legal to make it fair and just for everybody.
So for the last 20 years or so, Arizona has been a treatment-first state. So if you're arrested for possession of marijuana, their first step is to go to treatment. You have to be convicted at least 3 times before you actually would move into the prison system or that like. I just looked at data from August of this year. Of the 40,000 people in prison, it was about 102 that were there for marijuana-only purposes. But furthermore, I think you should look at California, what's happened with their black market. It's thriving, it's growing. And again, we're not going to have that option to change anything as we go forward. So all studies show that in states that are legalizing, more people are using, roads are less safe, it's hard to find an impaired free workforce, and that's going to be bad for Arizona's economy.
So Lisa's clearly making the argument that this would have a detrimental social impact on this state. From your vantage point, how do you see the social impact playing out in Arizona if voters were to legalize this?
Yeah, first and foremost, there is no viable study that shows any statistical increase in DUIs in any significant way. The most recent CDC report actually shows that youth engagement or youth use of marijuana has not increased and in some cases decreased as we've legalized in more states. And quite frankly, we built into this program, some of this funding will go to community health programs, will go to counseling, will go to education, will go to law enforcement to make our communities safer and stronger. We wanted to proactively get out in front of that and actually create programs that don't even exist today because of lack of funding. This will make our communities safer, and we also have the support of certain people in law enforcement, people in the healthcare industry, because they understand this black market, this unregulated industry is not safe, it's not responsible, and actually putting this program in place will make it safer and actually much more standardized across the board.
Lisa, what would the social impact be? You touched on some of the points from your campaign. What else do you see happening in Arizona if voters do this?
So actually, the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, which is the gold standard of research on this, it's existed for 50 years, says that in legalized states, they have the highest percentage of youth use. And Colorado leads in those states. So again, just looking to our neighbors to see what's happening. In addition, more AAA has come out opposed to recreational because they understand that as we have legalized marijuana, more people on our roads are driving impaired. Our workforce will suffer because, again, with legalization, more people are using, and it's harder to find an unimpaired workforce. In addition, they've capped this tax, so no matter what the cost is to the state of Arizona for these outside, social cost of hospitalizations, kids dropping out of school, whatever that might be, no matter the cost, we are locked in at that tax. And should the federal government legalize, you know they're going to tax it, and that will come right off the top of what Arizona takes in.
Some people have raised concerns like Lisa's doing about addiction, marijuana-induced psychosis, and other sort of detrimental effects. How does 207 address those types of issues? And is legalization kind of worth the potential increases in these sorts of negative outcomes or negative effects?
Yeah. Again, so first of all, there's no viable studies that shows legalization of this product leads to increased addiction issues, leads to psychosis. I mean, this is literally the reefer madness version of 2020. It's fear-mongering tactics that aren't based in science and aren't based on actual data. And I'll repeat what I said earlier. We actually put money aside into programs at every level of government, state, local, county, whatever it may be, for programs that will help people that are addicted, not just to this substance, but to all different things. We have addictions of all kinds. We can't eliminate addictive personalities, but we can treat them. Legalization will not change that. And in fact, it's going to make the environment safer. We're going to standardize and test the product. We're going to limit the potency of product. We're going to put labeling and child-proof packaging in place. And I can guarantee you, there is no way, there's no program in the world that's going to end marijuana use. If there's a program out there that's going to accomplish that, I would love to hear it. So I'd much rather have a safer market that's regulated and tested and makes money for the state than a deregulated, very dangerous black market that's selling on every street corner.
Lisa?
So it's simply not going to eliminate the black market. Black markets will be out there. This is a taxed product. The black market is growing in all of these areas. And what they have in places like Colorado are cities and towns have the option to opt out of having recreational. That's not going to be the case here. Every major city in Arizona has medicinal marijuana. What they've done here is write this law so that the current operators of medicinal will now have recreational. And once they have that dual license, they no longer have to have a medical director. They become for-profit instead of not-for-profit. And these communities cannot opt out of recreational. They can't say, well, 10 years ago, we thought, yes, we should offer our citizens this opportunity for this powerful medicine that they told us this was 10 years ago, that now they say we should use recreationally. You won't have that option to not have recreational marijuana.
So first again, nobody's telling anybody to use anything. This is about choice and about responsible adults making their own decisions. And again, this product is being used. It's going to continue to be used. And I'd much rather have a regulated, safe environment for any responsible adult that wants to use this product of their own choice in place as opposed to a black market. And I want to push back on the issue of local control. We specifically give local governments their own control over where, when, how these facilities can operate. If there's a medical dispensary, they can co-locate there, but they can stop any expansion beyond that. So local control is very, very prevalent in this, and we did that on purpose because we want mayors and city council members to work with their community to make the decisions that are best for their neighborhoods.
Okay, we're going to delve into some of the business elements of this in a bit. Lisa, some, including the Arizona Republic's editorial board, have argued that state leaders have really had their chance to act on this issue for a number of years. And this is the only kind of viable option to move forward. There seems to be quite a bit of public support by it, if we're reading the polls right. What is your response to that, to state leaders' kind of unsuccessful efforts or unfruitful efforts or unwillingness to move forward on this?
So it's interesting to me that we have these elected representatives, and that's who we as people should take our case to and make the case for changing the law if that's what we want to do. Instead, we have a special interest group that has funded this to the tune of millions of dollars to put it on the ballot, and we won't be able to change it. And that's a real issue. We will be locked into this. If the legislature does something, we can amend that. You can go back. You can tweak it. You can fix it. With Prop 207, we're going to be locked into this policy. So it really doesn't jive with me that we can have one special interest group that's going to come in and basically buy their way into this monopoly that they've created for themselves. This is absolutely written by, paid for by, and will benefit big marijuana industry.
Chad?
And I want to reiterate again, the Voter Protection Act is not locked in stone. And we've actually put language in here to help further the intent so the legislature can take action to improve this ballot measure. And the legislature can always take action to improve a ballot measure as long as they're furthering the intent of the voters. And that's a proven thing that voters like because the legislature has overturned the will of voters in the past, so we put that in here. And so, you know, I assume Lisa's trying to find arguments that resonate, but this is not a real point to make here. This is going to be passed by the voters because the voters want it, and if the legislature wants to address changes, make some tweaks in the future, they can do so as long as they honor the will of the voters.
Who is funding the Yes on 207 campaign?
We have a large group of people funding it, and many of them are already in the industry, and that's no secret. And it shouldn't be. We're transparent about who is putting the money behind this, but we have a large group of supporters, and the biggest group of supporters are Arizonans. We turned in over 400,000 signatures to qualify this in the middle of a pandemic. That's unheard of. That shows you the strong support. And we have groups such as the ACLU supporting this, and we have former Governor Fife signing things supporting this. We have the broadest coalition, most diverse coalition I've ever seen in Arizona politics supporting this ballot measure.
And who's funding the No campaign?
So the No campaign is a variety of people that are concerned, businesses, individuals, and I should add that we're definitely outspent. It's a little bit of David versus Goliath, but I would say at the last reporting period that we had access to, 99% of their funds had come from just 3 big marijuana companies. So to say that it's widespread is a misnomer. And when people find out, as we learn, that this is 17 pages of laws written to the advantage of the big marijuana companies, they change their mind. There's a difference in support for recreational or decriminalization and in funding or signing into law 17 pages that benefit a small minority of people who are going to pocket money for this.
Don't we have big industry groups and other sorts of industry groups passing legislation and furthering laws all the time here in Arizona? We see it with school choice. We see it with corporate tax breaks. I mean, we see it always. How is this different?
So they go to the legislature. This is a proposition that will be locked into. And as much as you say it can change, it's very difficult to do. You've spent millions of dollars to put it on the ballot. I don't think that you all are going to come and spend millions of dollars to correct things. And I don't think the legislature, they have to further the purpose. So they can't pull it back. They can only advance it.
Chad, do you want to rebut?
And again, they shouldn't be able to pull it back. If the voters vote in favor of this, there's a reason. But I do think it's a disingenuous argument to say one business group is not as good as another business group. So, Lisa likes to point out there's business leaders that oppose this, and somehow they're better than other business leaders that are in this industry. That's not a fair statement. Ballot measures, legislation, whatever it may be, are supported and passed with the support of business groups all of the time in Arizona. This is no different. And at the end of the day, the voters make the decision.
So, the business groups that are supporting us represent a wide variety of businesses, not one industry. So it's widespread. But we also have the Arizona Sheriff's Association, the County Attorneys Association, the Arizona Troopers, the Truckers, the Chambers of Commerce, Southern Arizona Leadership. We have multiple groups, the Catholic Bishops, the LDS Church. So there are multiple groups that are supporting the No campaign. It's not a small group of people. And look no further than the Secretary of State's voter guide, where you'll see that they had, I believe, 9 letters of support submitted, all with people with vested financial interest in the marijuana industry. Our letters come from anywhere from elected officials to moms, to these business groups, to the Arizona Medical Association, to the Pediatric Association. More than 100 letters submitted in opposition to this.
So the No campaign says that this initiative, as written, would essentially weaken the state's DUI laws.
Yes.
Is that the case?
It is. So what they've done is they've taken away the only bright line test that exists right now, which has served as an effective deterrent for marijuana DUIs on our roads. And I think that's one of the reasons you find all these different law enforcement groups supporting us. With more marijuana accessible and recreational, and again, as I mentioned, AAA, more impaired drivers will be on the road, and that's a danger to us.
Chad, would it weaken the DUI laws?
No, it actually is putting in place some of the strongest DUI laws in the country around marijuana. And one key point I want to make is because we have language in here, once again, that allows the legislature to further the intent of the voters by adopting new standards and new technologies as they come into being to test for impairment through marijuana. But our DUI laws mirror the current DUI laws. The breathalyzer is not the only way to test for impairment. There are all kinds of tests that officers can use to test for impairment, and those will apply in this case as well. And I want to point out, we actually put money into law enforcement, into education, into programs to try to cut down on DUIs, regardless of what the substance of impairment is. We will make our roads safer with this new money and the support for law enforcement.
So there is no roadside test. It doesn't exist right now. For the time being, until whatever this, whenever we come up with something we agree on, and right now we can't even agree if all COVID tests work, it could be a long time in the future before we have a roadside testing. And in the meantime, we have no bright line standard for marijuana DUI. So that's where the issue comes in. There is no roadside test, and it's going to make it very difficult. It's going to leave it to a judgment call, an impairment call, and it's going to be difficult to prosecute those. And therefore, and just studies show, legalization, more people are using, more impaired drivers will be on the road.
I just want to say there is a roadside test. There are field sobriety tests, field impairment tests that officers can use regardless of substance. People drive under the impairment of all kinds of substances, not just alcohol, and they can't be tested with the breathalyzer. This will fall under that same category. And again, I want to point out and stress this, there is no viable evidence that shows any statistical increase in marijuana-related DUIs in any state in the country. That is just simply a talking point they're trying to use to monger up fear.
So THC can remain in a person's system for weeks, longer even. And this is even though they may not be technically impaired. Does that unfairly punish people today who aren't actually impaired?
So what we have, so THC is in my understanding, and I'm not a scientist, but it is it stores in the fat. It's not water soluble like alcohol, so it does stay in your system longer. But it also compiles in there. So for chronic users, even though they may not feel impaired, that doesn't mean they're not impaired. And impaired drivers will be a hazard to our roads.
So should the THC alone, should that determine impairment in your view?
So people aren't pulled over because you look at someone and you think there's THC. They've done something. They're crossing over the middle line. They're speeding. They're doing something that's causing that. So it's not a standalone, but it is a test that is eliminated in Prop 207. It's still allowed for other uses, those things you mentioned, opioids or whatever else might be in someone's system, but it's taken out specifically in Prop 207 and cannot be used for prosecution.
But it's taken out because it's not an indicator. And Lisa just made the point. If somebody's crossing over the center line, if somebody's driving too slow, driving too fast, driving erratically, they can be pulled over, they can be given a field test, and they can be arrested for impaired driving, just like any other substance being used by anybody. So it does not change the standard, and that's the entire point. And we allow the legislature to let this evolve as new technology does come into being that will test those metabolites and test the level of impairment through chemical analysis.
Well, how could this initiative pose hurdles for law enforcement who are going to have to grapple with potentially more impaired drivers on the roadways, or having to seeing maybe more suspicious activity or behavior and having to do more of these tests, administering the types of tests that Lisa's talking about that could be rolled out in the future that could help tell them whether or not folks are impaired? I mean, what sort of problems could this pose for law enforcement, and how have you tried to deal with that in the proposition?
Well, again, I want to repeat that looking at other states, there is no significant increase in DUIs related to marijuana use. It just doesn't exist. And quite frankly, we give law enforcement more money and more resources and more tools with this funding, to provide safer streets across the board, not just around impairment related to marijuana, but impairment related to alcohol, whatever it may be. We put a lot of money into public safety, including and focused on traffic and road safety, and we did that on purpose. And furthermore, we have money in here for educational programs that will be actually out there talking about the need to drive safely and not use this product while you're under the influence of this product. Just like we've done in the past with alcohol, we did great PSAs on that. We can do it with this, and we will do it with this, and it works.
So in Washington State, traffic fatalities involving drivers who tested positive for marijuana have doubled since they legalized. In Colorado, someone died every 3 days in 2018 in a traffic fatality involving a driver who tested positive for marijuana. And 5 years earlier, it was one every 6.5 days. So clearly it is a problem. In addition, more and more people are showing up in emergency rooms due to THC levels. This is not the marijuana of the 60s, 70s, or even 80s. This is a potent drug. It's THC. It can have more than 90% THC in some of these products that will be sold. So this is not, Woodstock weed. It's not Cheech and Chong. It's not that 70s show, dating myself all over the place here. But this is a serious chemical that we're talking about.
which is exactly why you want to regulate it and make it safer. Legal is safer. There is a vast difference between buying a marijuana product on the street as opposed to buying it from a licensed, trusted user that's gone through a licensing process with DHS and has state approval, meets standardization requirements, has labeling, child-proof packaging. We have potency caps for products in this language. We are actually creating a safer environment, and that is the entire point. To Lisa's point, black markets are dangerous, legal markets are not, and that's what we want to accomplish here in Arizona.
The measure would allow people who have been convicted for things that would become legal under the act, such as possessing these small quantities of marijuana or paraphernalia, to have these criminal records expunged. Why should these offenses be expunged moving forward?
Because they should never have happened in the first place. These laws in Arizona are archaic and outdated. Like I said, we're the only state in the country that treats a first-time conviction for personal possession of marijuana as a potential felony. 7 people a day in Phoenix are arrested for marijuana possession. And unfortunately, predominantly, it's people of color or people from lower income communities. This current state of marijuana laws in Arizona is targeting certain communities unfairly. It's time to change that. It's time to move forward in how we deal with justice in this state and align with other states across the country. We have the most draconian, most archaic marijuana laws in the books in the entire United States. And nobody argues that. The Arizona Republic itself endorsed this measure because of that very fact. And it's time to stop the unfair prosecution of certain people in our state.
Do you disagree with the goal of this language in the proposition?
So I don't think we need a 17-page document that benefits mostly the marijuana industry to deal with expungement or decriminalization or even legalization. That could be done, it should be done at the legislature because expungement is super complicated and it should have stakeholders and it should have hearings, and that's how that should be conducted. But even if so, even if you want decriminalization and expungement, that doesn't need 17 pages of laws that are really created to benefit one industry.
Well, let me add, though, if this were a one-page document, I'd be hearing right now that this should be bigger, this should be longer, you're not doing enough. This is 17 pages because we have pages of safety regulations, testing requirements. We actually require DHS to make at least one unannounced visit in a facility every single year, and they have the authority to do it whenever they want. We have standards in here that create a safe environment, and if we didn't have that, I'd be hearing the exact opposite. This isn't big enough. It's not safe. It's long because it's safe, and it actually creates a system that is fair to everybody.
Lisa?
It's long because it's benefiting and protecting, it's allowing them to develop a customer base and keep a customer base, so to protect their customers, because that's more money for the very industry that has written and funded this. And again, Arizona is a treatment first state. So if you're arrested for marijuana possession, they're going to send you to treatment or a deferment program. You're not going to be convicted of a felony on your first go round.
Unlike the last effort to legalize marijuana, the current proposal before voters does not direct new funding to K through 12 education. Why is that?
Because we knew there'd be another ballot measure on the ballot doing that, and that's called Prop 208. I think you debated it here last night, in fact. We actually talked to the K through 12 people, and we knew they were coming with this. Having 2 ballot measures on the ballot, both funding the same thing, would be very, very confusing to voters. And quite frankly, we won't generate enough money to help the K through 12 solution. But we will generate enough money to completely make our community college system whole again after being gutted during the last recession. Community colleges get no state support any longer. This will make them whole back to pre-recession levels. And if you look at who community colleges serve, they serve mainly people in lower income communities, communities of color, adults trying to return to the workforce. They're a bridge to university education. They need funding, and we will make them whole again, something the state legislature has been unwilling to do now for going on 12, 13 years.
So the funds from this, and actually, let me start with the funds in every other state, the taxation, it comprises less than 1% of each state's total budget. So while it sounds like a large amount of money in the whole scheme of things, it's not going to cure Arizona's woes. I will say that there are a lot of people everywhere I go, and a lot of comments that I get are, yes, we can fix our education system with this. We can fund K-12. It's important they understand not one penny of this money will go to K-12 education. But we will have an expensive K-12 because we're going to have kids that are using, we're going to have more kids dropping out, we're going to have more kids, they're not going to get the education that they need because, again, teen use goes up.
Again, I just want to point out the CDC's most recent study shows that's not true. There's no increased usage amongst teens since we've been legalizing now for going on a decade across the country. And so that's just simply not a true statement. No evidence backs up that statement.
I just direct you right back to the National Survey on Drug Use and Health, and they have been surveying this for 50 years, and states with legalized recreational have the highest amount of teen use.
You dispute that?
I'm going to stick with the CDC because they are literally the expert in this.
So projections suggest that this proposal would raise between $200 million and $300 million in new tax revenue. I'm going to go back to this whole notion of the black market versus the regulated market. Isn't it better to have that tax revenue and have marijuana legally sold and regulated instead of having it sold on the underground market where the state and taxpayers don't benefit from that revenue? So
studies show, look to Colorado. There's a study in Colorado that shows for every dollar of marijuana-related revenue that they take in, they're spending $4.50 on marijuana-related expenses. That's not a good return on investment for the taxpayers of Colorado. I fear that the same thing could happen here with those exaggerated social costs that we've talked about, safety, education, public health. These are issues. And that's why they have allocated some of the funds, because they readily admit by where they allocate the funds that there are going to be more problems. Law enforcement's going to need more money. Public health's going to need more money because this is going to add to those issues. I would also say that in Arizona, the combined tax on cigarettes is somewhere between, I think, 40 and 63%. This tax, they've capped it at 30%. So no matter what happens, the tax on marijuana can't go above 30%, even if it cost our state more than that. And again, should the federal government legalize and tax, that will come right out of that 30%. We could be left with nothing.
So two things. Again, that can be changed. The legislature can change it, and they can do so if they're furthering the intent. That's I keep hearing the same argument. But secondly, I've got to reiterate the point that we are putting in place a program that funds these programs around safety, around education, around healthcare, because there's a lack of money. There's not going to be an increase in the need for these programs. There's already a need for these programs. We're bringing in new money to the state, and we're applying it to places that are already being shortchanged by a legislature that has been unwilling to respond to it. This is new money for the state for critical programs that we all know are necessary, regardless if this is legal or not. And again, I'm going to say this one more time. If I see anybody with the real plan to somehow eliminate the use of marijuana overnight, then I would love to talk to them. But that's not going to happen. We know it's not going to happen. And so we need to legalize it and make it safe.
So Prop 207 will only allow people to grow, I say only, Prop 207 will allow people to grow 6 plants. There are some who say that that number of plants was capped to protect the marijuana industry and the dispensaries that are funding the Yes on 207 campaign. What's your response to that?
No, it was capped at that number to create the ability for people who want to grow their own for their own personal use to have that ability. I like to compare it to beer. I like to brew my own beer at home. I can brew so many beers at home before I cross the threshold. I become a microbrewery. Then I have to get a license. I have to pay taxes, all that stuff. I only brew a 6-pack here and there because I want to drink it sometimes. It's the same analogy. People may want to do this on their own and have it for their own personal use. If you went any higher than that, then you're crossing a line and you're expanding beyond personal use. And that is not our goal, never has been. This entire piece of legislation is aimed at allowing responsible adults who want to make their own choices to use this product in a safe manner that generates money for the state.
Do you think that this provision would benefit the marijuana industry and the dispensaries that are going to be selling this product?
I think everything in these 17 pages to just benefit the dispensaries and the whole marijuana industry, cultivation. But so the problem is, 6 plants per person of age 21, so up to 12 plants in a household of 2 adults or to people of the age 21. Two things about that. First of all, marijuana use changes our brain. That's science. It's proven. And our brains are developing until we're at age 25, some say as late as 29 years of age. So we're legalizing something that's going to permanently affect our brains, our IQs, at an age where things are still changing. So that's an issue in itself. But it's also going to, what's happened in other states are, because people are allowed homegrown, the cartels have moved in and they're taking advantage of that. And they're using those home areas to grow and to do it right there in the open, because it is allowed, it is legal. So they're going in there and just, the black market exists right out there in the open. So that's an issue as well.
Chad?
I can't imagine any cartel that's going to make any money off of somebody growing 6 plants in their house. I don't know where that claim comes from. I've heard it several times now. I've looked far and wide to find any evidence of that, and I can't find it. This is about, again, responsible adults making their own personal choices within their own home. You can't grow it outside. It can't be in public view. There's very strict parameters in how you can grow it if you're going to do it at home. This is all about responsible use by adults 21 years of age and older.
But this is exactly why places like California and Colorado allow their communities to opt out, to eliminate that black market issue. That's not going to be possible here in Arizona. It is now in statute, should this pass, that you have the right to consume, to use, to grow recreational marijuana.
On your own property. We ban any smoking in public or open spaces. We give local control, again, on where facilities can be located and how and when. It's a private property rights issue. We have a long tradition of supporting private property rights in Arizona, so it's interesting to hear people saying we shouldn't be able to protect private property rights.
So you ban smoking, you don't ban consumption in public. So vaping, dabbing, all of those other ways to consume edibles, marijuana can still be done in public. You just can't smoke in public.
Vaping would actually fall under this once it's actually categorized, as a smoking product, which it will happen eventually. We tracked with the Smoke Free Arizona Act because that's the kind of the rule of the day, the law of the day here. We mirrored that language, expanded on it a bit, and as that language adapts, we'll automatically be included in that. So as those products get brought into the nexus of smoking in public, so will this product.
So it's interesting to me, that's kind of like DUI. When there's a roadside test, we'll use it, but we don't have one now. When we have these issues, we'll deal with them then. But right now, Prop 207 will go into effect, and we will be stuck. We're going to be using it instantly. It's not for the future. You can't pick and choose out of the 17 pages what parts we agree with and what we don't. It moves forward immediately should it pass.
So let's shift over to the business side of this. If this act passes, the first people who would be allowed to apply for recreational licenses will be the dispensaries that already hold medical marijuana licenses. Why is that fair?
So we actually created this system based on the foundation of the medical program that has been in place now for years, is trusted by the voters, and has been very well managed by DHS. We're expanding on that program, and we're doing that to avoid some of the pitfalls that Lisa has pointed out in some other states. We don't want a wild, wild west situation here. By allowing them to get licenses first, we have trusted operators that can get up and running and start chipping away at that black market immediately. And then there are licenses available on top of that, including 26 licenses for social equity purposes, and this cap grows over time as the population grows. But I can assure you, Arizonans don't want this product being sold in every street corner. They want it to be done in a pragmatic, cautious, responsible way. They trust the medical program. We heard that time and time again. So we use that as a foundation, and it's going to grow as the population grows. It's a very smart, very safe way to move forward in this.
Why is it not fair for the medical marijuana dispensaries to get the first crack at running these recreational shops?
So not only do they get the first crack at it, but they also change how they operate as a medical dispensary. So again, if they are granted that dual license, and they will be, then they no longer have to have a medical director, and they switch from being nonprofit to for-profit. So this is all about benefiting those who are funding this. I mean, it's really, bottom line, comes down to finances.
There's an option for these 26 additional licenses to be given to people from communities that are disproportionately impacted by the enforcement of previous marijuana laws.
Yeah.
What is the intent behind those licenses?
We want to make sure that the communities that have been most impacted by these horrible policies we've had in place for many years can actually participate in gaining economic development. This is going to create thousands of good paying jobs across our state. And like I said, it's going to generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue for the state, as well as local communities. So we want to make sure people in the communities that have been most impacted by previous and current marijuana laws in a negative manner can get in the door and participate in this and bring money and bring success to their own communities, because they deserve it more than anybody. They need to be made whole based on some of the previous negative and unfair impacts of current laws.
Would these licenses make members of that community, these communities, whole?
I don't believe so, but I think it's mostly interesting that you say they're the most important, yet they get the fewest licenses. It's really going back to these current operators that have written, funded, and will benefit from this the most. It's all about the finances for the current operators.
I want to point out, that's not the only licenses they can get. They can get all of the licenses. If they're a current operator, if you're a person of color or from a community and you have a license, you can get it now. There's more licenses that will be available. You can apply for those. This is a set aside of licenses just for communities that have been previously negatively impacted by these laws. But those other licenses, as they become available, will be open to everybody as well.
What have the medical dispensaries done to demonstrate that they can run this sort of program responsibly? You mentioned voter sentiment and maybe focus groups that you guys have done. What have they done to show that?
I mean, all you have to do is look at the medical program. It's incredibly trusted by voters. We tested this with focus groups, with going to neighborhoods and talking to people, with stakeholders. Arizonans trust the medical program. They see it as something that's worked. They trust the Department of Health Services and how they've managed it. And they really wanted to see this program be kind of an extension on that and do it in a very responsible way. So that's why we did this. I mean, again, we want to avoid a scenario where you open up the door like they did in some states. California, I think, made some mistakes. We don't want to be California. I think most of us agree on that right now. And so we made sure we're not going to be California. And we looked at what they did wrong and learned from that and created a much better proposition that looks like Arizona and will benefit Arizona.
Should these medical marijuana dispensaries be trusted?
So just 10 years ago, these are the people who told us this was a powerful medicine, that it was capable of helping people with severe illnesses, and that it would be treated as a medicine. And now these very same people are telling us that it should be recreational. I don't know of any other situation where that happens. I would say that if you vote down Prop 207, you'll still have medical marijuana. It'll still be under the supervision of a medical director, and it will still be at a not-profit. Although, trust me, there's money being made off of it. But what the point is, you'll have medical marijuana. We were told it was a powerful drug, and it should be kept that way. Keep it medical.
And if you vote no on this, you'll still have an unregulated, dangerous black market that's going to continue to thrive.
So if voters do approve this ballot measure, it would be extraordinarily difficult for any changes because of this Voter Protection Act that we've talked about. What requires 3/4 or so of the legislature to further the intent of the law. What possible outcomes or complications do you see in the years ahead if Prop 207 passes?
Well, there's always a potential for complications with any piece of legislation, be it through the legislature, referral from the legislature, ballot measure from the citizens, whatever it may be. But again, we tried to proactively address this by actually putting language in here on some of the key provisions that says the legislature is furthering the intent by taking certain actions, and most notably around DUIs and law enforcement around DUIs, because I think that is the area that's going to grow the most and evolve the most as technology becomes available, and it's going to become available. They're working on that right now. So we made sure that the legislature can proactively do that. It won't end up in court. It'll further the intent of the voters, and it'll make our streets safer as technology continues to grow and give law enforcement the tools they need.
How do you keep marijuana out of the hands of kids?
Well, again, we have some of the strictest standards in the country in this ballot measure. We have child-proof packaging. We have labeling. We ban advertising towards youth. We actually ban the production of any edibles that look like animals or cartoon figures or toys. We do everything possible to limit the ability for this product to be marketed or obtained by people under 21 years of age. And again, we also provide money for youth who may get involved in this, and we don't want them to be. We have counseling, we have healthcare programs, we have all of that stuff that doesn't exist right now, quite frankly. And we know youth are using this product right now and not getting that help. So again, we'll make this overall environment safer by funding these programs and putting in very strict standards and regulations on how this product can be marketed and sold.
So again, brand new study that just came out of the state of Washington that shows that the more kids are exposed to the advertising that will be prevalent, the more likely they are to use. They become desensitized to it. Also, as far as the restrictions that you've placed on the shapes of the edibles, there's sports equipment, cars, there are all sorts of things that are still going to appeal to kids. But bottom line, whether it looks like something that appeals to kids or not, a candy bar is a candy bar, a cookie is a cookie, and the servings in these things are incredibly small. It's an eighth of a cookie or a tenth of a candy bar. I've not seen a cookie or candy bar that I don't want the whole thing of, and kids certainly can't detect whether that's a candy bar that has marijuana in it or the likes of a cookie, and they certainly don't understand that one bite is all they should take of that. If they take it, they shouldn't take any of it, but if they do, they don't stop at that one bite. So that's a real concern for our kids.
But let me say something though. Again, they will know because it will be in childproof packaging with labeling on it that says what it is. So again, if that somehow ends up in the hands of a kid, that's probably the adult's fault, just like any other product that's bad for children. And we can't ban every product that's potentially dangerous to children. We put in safety measures as much as we can, and we have to educate adults on how to properly manage their own homes and keep their kids safe. And we provide money for those types of programs from this revenue coming in.
But again, we won't know if we have enough revenue to deal with the cost of this, and we can't fix that should that be the problem. We are limited to the tax that they have self-imposed this limit on, and we will not be able to change that.
Who's supposed to pay for any potential excess costs that might be incurred by a program like this?
So again, there won't be. We actually have language built into this that says the upfront costs have to be covered first before that additional revenue goes to some of those other funding areas, community colleges, roads, et cetera. But in no study have I seen in any state in the country will $300+ million and eventually probably $500+ million not be enough to cover the programs we're talking about today. This will be plenty of money. And I want to point out too, again, the legislature can change the tax if they need to. And we also give DHS very broad authority in how they can manage this program and how they can make rules and change some of the enforcement standards. So there's a lot of wiggle room in this intentionally that allows DHS to do things administratively, to adjust the program as necessary and make sure it's safe and has the resources it needs to be implemented correctly.
So I recently had a conversation with a Democrat transplant from Washington who was a middle school principal in the state of Washington. He wasn't concerned about the legalization of recreational marijuana until it was enacted. And then he noticed all of a sudden they had a possession of marijuana issue at their school. And they still had a zero tolerance policy at the middle school, but the kids didn't understand why what they were doing was wrong, and their parents didn't understand why they were being punished for it. It was legal, therefore it shouldn't be the severe punishment that they were receiving at school. So it's going to affect our kids, it's going to affect our schools, and that's coming from firsthand from a principal in a school who wasn't concerned and now is gravely concerned and is speaking to Arizona voters about that.
All right, curveball question for you guys. I'm going to let each of you ask the other a question. Chad, you want to go first?
Okay, I was not ready for this. It's exciting here. Well, at least I ask you this, and I mean this sincerely. Do you really believe that marijuana use is going to end tomorrow or next year or the year after? And do you think there's a way to stop marijuana use and stop the black market? That's a sincere question. I want to know the answer to that.
I sincerely believe that having a DUI bright line deterrent makes a difference. I believe that not telling our kids that it's okay by legalizing will keep them from using it. It may not keep all of them from using it, but will keep more of them from using it. I believe that as we tell them that it's okay, I had an experience, and I'll mortify my son right now. He was a senior in high school. We've talked about drug use at our family table more than I'd ever care to admit. We talk about it all the time because I've seen firsthand what drug abuse can do in a family. So we talked about this all the time. My son was trying to decide where to go to school. He got an invitation to go visit in Colorado. He played hockey. And this is a kid who barely took an Advil. He was very conscious of what he put in his body. He goes to Colorado and he was like, It's everywhere. How bad can it be? It's everywhere. It can't be that bad. And I'm going, we've just had 18 years of discussions about why this isn't a good idea for our family, for you, and one trip to look at a potential college has totally undone 18 years of conversations. So that's my personal experience, and I do come at this. I've been involved in this for a long time because of a personal passion. But even if you believe in a recreational or decriminalization, and I would argue that there's a big conversation to be had there, you don't need 17 pages of what's in this Prop 207. It's to the benefit of those who wrote and funded it, not to the citizens and taxpayers of Arizona.
Do you have a question for Chad?
I do. Do you really feel, well, so I'm here as a volunteer. I believe you're paid to represent this cause. And if you weren't being paid, would you be here fighting so passionately for this?
Yes, I have been for years. I supported the 2016 ballot measure, even though I think it had a lot of faults in it, and I think we've corrected those faults. I fought for this when I was in the legislature, actually. I think that this is one of the most pressing issues in Arizona, simply because our laws are so draconian. We prosecute and actually persecute certain individuals from certain communities much more so than other people. There is no argument to be made that people of color aren't more targeted for arrest and conviction of these crimes than white people. Hands down in Arizona, there's no argument. No data shows that that's not true. It's time to end that. This is just unfair. It's unjust. We're way behind the times on this. We're way out of step with the rest of the country. Again, the Arizona Republic says the exact same thing. It's time to fix and update our laws and move forward and get past this and make it a very safe environment. And again, let responsible adults make their own choices.
All right, we're going to move into closing statements. Chad, I believe the first closing statement goes to you. Yeah,
sounds good. Thank you again for this opportunity. Thank you, Yvonne, for managing this debate. Appreciate it. I think we were better than Biden and Trump or whatever, so it's probably easier for you. Thanks, Lisa, for the civil debate here tonight. I appreciate it. I'm going to end by just saying this. Arizona's laws are way behind the times when it comes to marijuana. They're outdated, they're archaic, and quite frankly, prohibition does not work. All prohibition does is lead to a dangerous, unregulated market that locks up and unfairly targets people of color for the most part and wastes millions of dollars every single year. Prop 207 will stop that, and at the same time, it'll create thousands of jobs in communities across the state that desperately need it as we come out of this new recession we're in. It'll generate hundreds of millions of dollars for programs we all care about, and at the end of the day, it's going to get us in line with the rest of the country in terms of how we manage marijuana. Simply put, legal is safer. I think that's a very obvious statement for most people, and that's why I'm asking every single Arizonan to vote yes with me on Prop 207. Thank you.
Lisa, closing statement.
Yes, thank you. I reiterate, thank you for the civil conversation. It's been fun to see you in person. We've been doing this on a kind of a virtual roadshow, so thank you for hosting us tonight. What I would encourage you to really look at are the details in the 17 pages. You could decriminalize, you can legalize, you don't need 17 pages. This is absolutely written by, funded by, and will benefit a very select few big marijuana companies, one of them being the first marijuana billionaire to exist in the country. So read it carefully, know those details. Go to our website, no207az.com. We provide the 17 pages unfiltered there for you to look at, and then we'll provide you with some fact sheets that you can go to should you choose to. But we have no doubt that if Prop 207 goes into effect, it's going to harm our kids, it's going to put us in more danger on the road, it's going to have a negative impact on our economy, and we're going to be locked into this bad policy for the foreseeable future. If you want to legalize, if you want to decriminalize, there's another way to do it. Prop 207 is not the answer, and I encourage you, read your voter guides, go to these websites, do your own homework, but know that this is not simply about decriminalization. Thank you for having us.
Thank you both for being here, and that is it for this debate. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please tune in tomorrow at 3 o'clock for a debate between the Gilbert mayoral candidates. And you can keep up with AZ Central's political coverage on azcentral.com, and please subscribe to the Arizona Republic's weekly political podcast called The Gaggle. Thanks so much.